Welcome to episode 4 of Conversations on Creativity and Life. I'm your host, Rochelle Dion. Join us this week as we speak to Stephen Peasley, where our topics include improvised musicals and brain surgery.
So for our guests, for our audience members who don't know, Stephen Peasley is a Calgary-based software developer who decided to revisit thespian pursuits after a 25-year hiatus. I can't wait to talk about that. Let's start there. Let's jump in there. Tell me about that.
Well, it's funny that that's kind of how we really met years back. We did Sound of Music together. Like we were in, the same kind of orbit of people and whatnot, but that was the thing that really kind of bookends this whole thing, I think.
For sure.
We did the Sound of Music together. You were the Liesel to my Rolf.
That's right.
Yeah. And we went our own separate ways. We started living our own lives, and then who knows what happened with theater stuff, but for me, it went on the back burner. I focused on the stable career, something predictable, something secure, and got into software development and really didn't do much of anything in the way of theater. Still kind of some creative things, but nothing in like a formal capacity. And all that time, there was something in me that wanted to be doing that still or again. And I just kind of pushed it down for a while and then kept pushing it down. Thought, I don't have time for that anymore. I'll work on this career thing that has a resume and, I have this established thing that I'm supposed to just do until I die. And I don't know, you can do that for only so long. And the heart wants what the heart wants, and it just kept kind of scratching at me. And after a long time, it really was. I think it was after probably 20 years, because it was really about 5 years ago I started getting back into improv. Did a bit of that in high school when, you and I first met, and then years later, found myself doing improv and I did miss this. And through that, I got involved with doing improvised musicals because I always liked singing and I liked, the Sound of Music, that's a musical. But a friend of ours, Andrew, at the time, remember he got a guitar one year for Christmas. And then we're like, oh, look, we can just play all the songs we like all the time. So we'd get together and, just play music and jam and sing. And then, boy, that career stuff really gets in the way of a lot of enjoyment in life, hey? So all that was, really shelved for a long time. So I really was finding getting back into it that I really was getting that fulfillment again. And can you hear my dog chewing on her raccoon toy? She's looking out the window, squeaking it, so hopefully that's not too distracting.
No
and it's
worries.
too adorable for me to stop it. So back to the improv thing, once I started getting into that more, then I moved into improvised musicals. We would do a full Broadway-style musical for an hour based on an audience suggestion. And I thought, this is the most fun that a person can have doing improvised musical. It's really fun. And every now and then you hit it so accurately. Maybe it's the audience, it's the night, it's the suggestion. It's just everybody's kind of at the top of their game and just everything sometimes comes together just beautifully. And you just have these incredible shows. And you're always kind of chasing that.
I have some questions. I don't want to cut you off here, but I'm so curious about that. That's the last time you and I met up. We didn't dive into that as deeply as I'd love to because, when you and I were in that musical together, I'd only had classical music lessons. I'd had classical voice lessons, classical piano lessons. And then as I left high school, I knew that that wasn't the path for me. That wasn't necessarily what I wanted. Um, and I think if there had been, you know, the musicians institutes, if I knew more about those types of places that had like popular music programs, I might have pursued that. But I thought my choices to study at the university level were really classical or jazz. So I pursued jazz as an attempt to sort of learn a little bit about improvisation, a little bit about jamming, a little bit about, you know, musical structure and things that weren't all about reading it off the page and, you know, playing pianissimo here and playing forte there, but really creating something of your own. And for me, that was a wild experience because talk about a Saskatchewan farm girl who had no clue how to swing. You know, I wasn't feeling the 2 and 4. I was feeling the 1 and 3 and marching around and trying to, you know, find my way. But I did eventually, and found that I had so much joy with that. And really, those aside from songwriting, which is a slower form of improvisation, right? Because you're improvising, but you're also testing those theories, making mistakes and rewriting and that kind of thing. Um, so jazz school was really my first crack at improv, and it was exhilarating and terrifying and all of those things. But we still had so much form, you know, we had so much structure. You know, you're improvising on the 12 bar blues, or you're improvising on rhythm changes, we call them, the changes for I Got Rhythm or Sweet Georgia Brown. Um, you know, there's still structure and chord changes. So you know somewhat what to anticipate. And then you're still feeding off your fellow musicians and off the audience and that kind of thing. But tell me more about an improvised musical, because I think every time you say that, I think my brain turns into white noise and some like little bombs go off, and I can't even imagine. So you have, and I saw a quick YouTube clip just to try to get a feel for what was going on there. The one that I saw, you had a keyboard player who was
Hmm.
like creating the music, and then you have a whole cast of individuals, and you've got an audience suggestion. You take a theme, and you're creating a musical in the style of or on the subject matter of. Tell me more about that.
We get the suggestion from the audience, and that usually is what informs the whole theme. Once in a while, like we'll do a more of a themed show, like around Halloween. We'll do like a Tim Burton style. So we do have like a few things that we try to hit with that in terms of um, kind of the feel of that format. It's still unplanned, but we just know, well, in order for it to be like a Tim Burton style thing, um, when we kind of build the world in the beginning, we'll have characters jump out and I
Right.
am the one who plays the piano. I am the one who eats the fries. And a lot of those mechanics that you'll see typically in those types of Tim Burton shows, like we'll try to hit with the musical as well. Um, but other times it is just fully open. And the last one that I did over the Kinkanauts was what was the suggestion now? I can't remember what the suggestion was, but the whole world was around like we ran a farm and we just grew babies. So like, you know, we grew babies from the ground, kind of like Cabbage Patch Kids, I guess. 'Cause think of how weird those were. Um, so, you know, we would water them, we would care for them, and we would pluck them up out of the ground, and then we'd send them to their new home. And we had this whole story that came out of that. And it's the way that you were talking about jazz, it's really not that different. It's what is that they say about jazz? Where like there's no wrong note because it's always like what the next note is.
Yeah, you're only ever a semitone away, obviously, from something that's in tune. But if you play it with purpose, you meant to get there. You were creating suspense before you landed on the moment, right?
Right. So there is
Yeah.
a lot of that too. And sometimes it just falls apart and you know everybody laughs, but in those moments, you know, people go, "Okay, well it is made up." So
Yeah.
um but it's the practice. It is just that willingness to jump in regardless of having no plan, and putting trust in the people that you're doing it with too, whether that's the
Yeah.
other musicians or the other singers. um, it it's really difficult and scary if we think that the entire solution or the entire song is just within ourselves. But oftentimes, if we're able to just say, I'm a part of this, I'm not this whole thing, the next line might be in my partner. I don't have to know what
Hmm.
the next line is. And the brain does so much magic when we're not forcing it to. It's continually just churning away, making connections. And there's so many times in an improv show and in a musical improv show where you are making your contributions, you're saying a line, you're singing a verse, and maybe 3 scenes later, you do another song, and in the background, your brain is kind of connecting them. And then even later in the show, your brain's made this connection, and then you have this other song or scene that somehow seems to magically tie everything together. But our brains are wonderful. They just keep working. Um, they just keep making these connections, and it's scary, but if you just trust it,
Yeah.
pretty rewarding things can happen. So the the most fun is, well, and the scariest thing is when you step forward and open your mouth to sing, and you realize I don't know what I'm about to sing, but then
Yeah.
words start coming out.
Yeah. This is the one of the bravest things I can imagine, honestly. Even as a trained musician, as somebody who's done the work, I'm not on my game necessarily today, but at one point in time, I was devoting so many hours a day and was really, on top of my game. And this is still one of the scariest things I can imagine, really, like, because you're pulling it all together, right? And I guess, there's the whole urban or hip hop sort of tradition of all that improvised kind of free form stuff. There's the jazz legacy of improvisation. It exists in so many mediums. There's comedy improv and that kind of improv, but to do it in a musical connotation while you're trying to sing in tune and maybe throw in some choreography and you know talk about the brain. I can't. I would love to do a brain scan at that point and see what in the
Yeah.
brain is lit up, right? How many sections of the brain are you using? Your analytical side, your creative side. You know, I bet you are just fired up. There's probably a little bit of fight or flight, fear of death in there as well. And like
Mhm.
the whole thing's got to be lit up at that point, no?
And maybe that's why I think it's the most fun that you can have, is because once all that is washed through your brain for an hour and you walk away from it, it's like, there's like a show high from doing the show.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you're all fired up, and it kind of takes you a while to kind of come down from it. But maybe it's because so much of the brain has been activated for the full show that you just have that experience of sort of that euphoric thing. Like that was just amazing and fun and magical. And
Wow.
yeah.
I'm super impressed. I mean, hats off to you and the whole crew for doing that. I think it's amazing. I'd love to come and check it out sometime if you're still up to that. I this might be a kind of a weird segue, but because we're talking about the brain, and definitely don't feel obliged to share anything that you don't want to share, other than by happenstance catching you in a performance very recently. The last connection I had made with you was actually upon discovering some of your news. And
Mhm.
I don't want to get too specific into it. I'll let you share as much or as little as you'd like to share with us.
About 10 years ago, it was December 7th, 2012. I had a fall at home, fell into the wall, and went to the hospital. Thought this probably isn't supposed to happen. I felt otherwise, pretty okay. It was this mysterious thing, like I just fell. One thing led to another, and it was discovered that I had a golf ball sized brain tumor. And I had surgery to remove it on February 26th of 2013. So I've just celebrated my 10-year mark since brain surgery. It was non-cancerous, which was a real gift. It was very scary, of course. And of course, anytime there's something growing that you didn't expect, that's the fear. Well, okay, is this going to spread? Like, is it cancer? Like, what is it? I want to know what it is. I want it out. So I had a long time, like I had headaches and migraines pretty regularly growing up. I was about 10 years old and I started getting really regular headaches. So they don't know when my tumor started growing, but that's the working theory is that it started around the age of 10. The type of tumor that I had is called a meningioma. So it grows in the layers that surround the brain and typically will push into the brain from those layers wrapping it. They called it asymptomatic tumor, which I disagree with.
Yeah.
I had a lot of headaches. And before I would get a headache, I would go blind. I would have like kaleidoscope vision, and I would lose almost all of my vision before I would get a migraine. And I had worsening mental health over the years as this thing slowly grew and pushed into my brain more and more. So calling it asymptomatic always bothered me because I experienced a lot of things from it. They were able to remove all of it in surgery. The surgery was about 7 hours. It was here in Calgary. And I didn't have to have any other types of treatment. They were just able to get it all out with surgery. The recovery was pretty intense. It was a craniotomy, so that's quite a bit for a body to deal with and to recover from. But I still had that cavity in my brain from where the tumor had pushed in. So there was some damage there. And in time, that cavity lessened in size, but it'll never fully go away. There'll always be some amount of damage there. And after 3 years, I thought, yeah, now I feel good, like I'm healed and I'm kind of normal. But then after 5 years, I thought, no, now I'm good and normal. And now I've just let go of the idea entirely.
Yeah.
Things have definitely improved. Like my mental health vastly improved with that out of my head. The last migraine that I ever had was the one I woke up with from brain surgery. So I was in the ICU and I woke up after surgery and I just had a intense migraine. Just felt like a car was parked on top of my head. And that was my last real migraine. So just kind of funny. It was just like, was it just the brain and the tumor were like, okay, one last one and then that's it, just for old time's sake. And I don't get headaches anymore unless I'm not hydrating enough, but generally, like I don't get headaches. Life is better. I am left with a blind spot, but it's manageable. It's in the handshake area, so my brain has adapted around that quite well. Although I can't play ping pong anymore because the ball just disappears when it enters that space. And a friend of mine discovered that after surgery. We're playing ping pong again, and he found that he could just shoot it right in that handshake zone, and it would just disappear. Like I had no idea, just couldn't track the ball.
I don't know if that's strategic or dirty. I don't know.
Yeah, he loved it. So I stopped playing with him. But that was the big brain journey, and I'm sure I'm still on that journey. It's hard. I don't think you ever really leave it fully behind. It's something I never thought I would be talking about in the past tense. From the diagnosis to surgery, it was around 3 months, maybe 2.5 months. The longest time, every minute felt like an hour. And I just couldn't imagine finally getting to that point where I would be getting it dealt with. And certainly not sitting here 10 years later talking about it. It was just, time is just such a strange thing depending on what's going on. If you're miserable or scared, time just stretches. But if you're happy and having fun, it's just gone in an instant. So I, yeah,
Um,
I had a time there where it was just the scariest thing. I was doing everything I could to try to prepare for it, mentally and physically, and I was meditating, I was working out, I was running. I wanted to go into that surgery as strong and prepared as I could, so I could come out of it strong. And I had a mantra at the time, and it was strong in, strong out. That was my whole plan.
mm,
And even after, like, I have continued with that. I just thought, if life throws something like that at me again, I want to be able to just bat it away. And if I can't bat it away, I want to be able to be in a physical and mental state where I can at least not be as impacted by it if it's, something that blindsides me. If I get hit by a car, well, I know, like, I try to keep myself in good shape. I know I'll at least bounce back better than I would if I just, you know, sat and didn't wasn't ready for anything.
yeah, for sure. That's a remarkable story, Stephen. I really, it makes me feel silly for my earlier comment about improv being the scariest thing. I mean, obviously, this is all relative.
Improv is
I meant that. I meant that in a creative sense.
scary.
But saying things like brain surgery and craniotomies and those types of things are that's the real stuff that we go through as human beings. We all will get our challenges that we have to face, and that was certainly one of yours. But I certainly I know I reached out to you when I found out about the news, and to think that that was 10 years ago, and that 10 years have passed, and that you're so vibrant and healthy, and not only successful in your day job, or your that big boy career, that adulting stuff, but also that you've had this return to your love of theater, and your love of music, and your love of creativity, and that you're living, I think, from certainly from the outside, and I can't wait to get your opinion on this, a very holistic, beautiful, warm, enriched, lovely life. And I'm curious, one of the reasons I brought up your diagnosis and your surgery is because I was curious if there were any slumps in there, or did the brain surgery act as a catalyst for you to squeeze every moment and of enjoyment out of life, or were there moments of darkness and depression where you maybe went away from that before you came back to this beautifully stated mentality of strong in and strong out?
I've always struggled to separate what affected what. Like, I had a physical change, with the tumor actually being removed from my head. But just going through that experience in life, I mean, that's transformative on its own, whether they would have done anything in there or not, just, going through that. Um, there's the fear, the perspective. So it's always been hard to really pinpoint, like, well, what can I attribute this to? Do I just have this renewed appreciation for life because I went through this scary experience, and that has made me want to just dive into well, I better do this creative stuff while I'm here because it's so fulfilling and, gives life more meaning. Or would that have happened anyway? I don't know.
Mm.
And it's probably multiple factors, one of which is the whole brain journey. So it's hard to say what the motivation for things like that are, but all I know is I always have just had that draw towards creativity and storytelling and music, and theater encapsulates all that. So it's a great place to try to make a go of it.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Conversations on Creativity and Life. Thanks to our guest, Stephen Peasley, for joining us today. This is part 1 of a 2-part series, so be sure to check back for part 2. In the meantime, you can find him at stephenpeasley.com.